Okay, you're good.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Shannon Muller, planner with the City of Boulder Planning and Development Department. I'll just talk to you real quick for about a minute here with a brief intro. So this is a building proposed at 900 Walnut Street that is proposed to be connected to the existing St. Julian Hotel. It's on the side of a building pad that's been planned for redevelopment as part of the civic use space since the 1990s. There's quite a bit of history on the property, so I'll let the applicant team talk through that with you. But this proposal is here at DAB tonight because it's located in the non-historic area of the Downtown Urban Design Guidelines. And it is also located in the Ninth and Canyon Urban Renewal Plan that was created in the 1990s, specific to the redevelopment of this area that included the St. Julian. It's being reviewed as part of a site review amendment. Staff identified a couple of design criteria for the board's discussion that were noted in the memo. So with that, I am happy to turn it over to our applicant team.
So Matt, we're hoping to, we understand that some people have a 6:30 hard stop on this, so we want to kind of keep your presentation to around 10 minutes if we can, and then we'll allow some public participation. The DAB members will ask clarifying questions, and then we'll get into a discussion.
Absolutely.
So that's the plan.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
great.
Good.
We'll put that up on the screen. Sorry for that little hiccup there. So we mentioned that we're going to just go over the highlights here, and I think it's important for this project because it is unique. It was planned back in the 1980s. You can see this timeline that we have here up on the screen, starting the 80s with the revised urban renewal plan. And then the St. Julian came to fruition and had a grand opening in 2005. Since then, many people would consider the lobby to be sort of a pseudo living room for the Boulder community, been a great contributor where people from all walks of life have come there to just celebrate and enjoy the benefits of Boulder and each other in that community that's been developed here. The design for the project also includes a public parking garage below grade to support the neighborhood and the civic use programs, which further contributes to that community. Originally conceived and designed to accommodate a future children's museum and music folk venue, the civic pad was left dormant for many years. We were looking at this from the early 2000s all the way to present day. And unfortunately, looking at these other civic uses, it just wasn't viable. So between 2002 and 2015, the city of Boulder created several task force initiatives to develop a civic use program that would be self-sustaining. In 2013, the city commissioned 4240 to develop a concept to help support that. This was approved in 2014, and in 2015, it's worth noting that the city of Boulder, Cajun, and St. Julian partners signed a partnership agreement, which is still active, to develop use, I should say, a new civic use facility as a meeting and conference facility, which will serve Boulder. And what's unique about this is it's nonprofits for meetings and gatherings with really preferential scheduling over, let's say, for profit or private gatherings. I've been into this a lot deeper in 2019, but then in 2020, COVID came, and as you all know, that changed the world forever. We came back and we restarted this year, and really excited to jump into this design thinking. So hopping into that a little bit deeper, we want to talk a little bit about the program. There's a lot of information on here, but perhaps focusing on these elements here, which is really just the program. The building is approximately 54,000 square feet with a 6,500 square foot conference room. And then supporting that, we have a pre-function support spaces like warming kitchen, restrooms, and storage at the ground level. And all of those are also being supported by the main hotel. Above that, at levels 2, 3, and 4, the upper levels are 39 guest rooms. It's worth noting that the height of the project is identical to that approved civic use project in 2002 and in 2014, and that is at 55 feet. That's the same as the existing context. And that level aligns quite well with connecting buildings, the urban design, and really starting to get into that. It's funny, but we actually have to start with the structure. This civic use pad is on top of the existing KJ garage. And so what we're showing on here, we didn't submit this, but we just thought that this would be a good way to explain a little bit more about where we're coming from. So when you're looking at this, this is nestled into this downtown urban fabric, but really what we're trying to do is figure out how to nestle into that fabric and work with that existing structure. And there's two major challenges that we had to overcome. So when you're looking at this structure, you'll see all of these columns in the garage level that are roughly on a 28-foot by 28-foot grid. And the clear span for, let's say, the conference facility up above is quite challenging. And so we had to come up with unique ways of trying to deal with that. And then if you look at the diagram up above, this is really looking at the floor slab, or if you will, sort of the civic pad that everyone can see today. And what's worth noting is that we're in a flood zone. This is really the second key challenge. So how do we deal with that? We've already dealt with that from the beginning, but we can't change that facade. We can't change access to that without demolishing it, essentially. We'd have to restructure this whole portion of the garage to get that to change. But we do have maintained the existing connection at the 10th Street corridor right here. And we had planned for the civic use building from the get-go and had an exit and entry here that we were maintaining for this design as well. So I think it's just worth noting those two. While I'm on here, I'm just going to show you briefly the design in that grid and how it translates up into the building. And you can see that we can accommodate those step backs to some degree, but we can't do it in every, there are limitations based on the structure that don't afford us all of the opportunities to have that structure set back. So I think that is worth showing, looking at, sorry, I'm pulling up the wrong ones here, but I think it's good to look at this building section. And you can see that in section where that step is. So the floor slab at level 1 is approximately 3.5 to 4 feet above grade down below. And again, that's above the floodplain. And then you can see transfer beams here that are tying into those columns. That makes it really critical and very limiting in terms of how to work that space. In fact, in our earlier designs, we had a slightly different technique, but we had to rework it with our structural engineers to make this work. And then I want to show you the level 1 plan here. And this just shows those grids. So you can see these clear spans in the civics event space with the columns in the corners. There's some compromises to make all of this work both structurally and spatially, which I think is worth noting. I wanted to show you the pedestrian passage, this pedestrian easement here. And so getting into this urban realm, we wanted to understand how do we maintain what we have but enhance it. And so this passage has been very active over the years, but it has just had this concrete pad next to it. So what we're looking at doing is shifting that easement over and really creating a really vibrant space. You can start to see this sort of whimsical, dynamic arch passageway that has influence from these pedestrian imageries up above. And that really helps create this connection. And so this gap, if you will, is articulated between the two buildings. And it really creates this clear separation between the original St. Julian and the St. Julian Annex and Conference Facilities, civic use, if you will. And we're really looking at this being this confluence of energy. So pedestrians coming off of Canyon Boulevard can come up the stairs. Pedestrians coming from Walnut come here. Guests from the hotel can pass across, and public that come up can come up through this elevator here. I'll show that in a larger scale. And so you can see this diagram. If somebody's entering the hotel, they come to the lobby here. And if they want to go to the conference facility, they can come all the way through, pass outside undercover, and then come into the annex. Conversely, they could come through 10th Street, whether it's one side or the other, come down, come across, and over and into any of these entries, depending on what their purpose serves. And then vice versa, off of Canyon, they can come in here too. That was something that you requested of us, so we wanted to provide that diagram.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And it is worth noting that the primary entry is on the west side here. There are secondary entries, but they're really primarily for service and for egress. Now I want to move to building elevation 2. or I'm sorry, hold on. The context building. So getting into the elevation and thinking about the articulation of the facade, what we've been saying is we want to nestle this into the fabric and make sure that it is born of the site, born of the context. And so I'm going to zoom in here and look at that context and elevation. So on the left is St. Julian Hotel. You can see a clear distinction between the base and the middle and the top. And then the eastern neighbor has a very similar base, middle, top type of organization to it. As well, you'll see that there are 3 bays here that are 86 feet on the right and 86 feet on the left. There's a requirement to maintain 75 feet. We can't do that with the structural grid, but we're trying to stay in keeping with our neighbors. So what we have done is articulated this center bay that's about 87 feet, 10 inches wide. And then you can see these step backs that we have. I mentioned that corridor on the left, that step back at the passageway. And then the balconies step back here about 13 feet. And then on the west, and then on the east, it steps back about 8'6". And you'll also notice, and this becomes important as we start to look at step backs on all sides, is that we're stepping back on the eastern side to respect the neighbors' views. At the upper levels of the north facade, it steps in a similar way. So let me show you that. Actually, I think probably the better view for this, let me pull it up. Sorry, give me a second to pull up the right one. Oh, this is just another view on Kenyon Boulevard, both from the southwest and the southeast. And you can see how the building starts to erode away, if you will, for those setbacks to respect that. Also, you'll notice that this portion is a little bit more special because it's trying to signify entry. And then on the other side, we're stepping that back as well. But going again back to the north facade, this is a little bit hard to see in elevation. If we need to, we can pull up a SketchUp model and go through that. But you can see the stepping that we're doing here. It still has the base, it still has the middle, and it still has the top. The base is largely utilitarian because that is the back of house along the alley. But we have tried to add windows and other expression that helps enhance the architecture at the base. And then when we get to the middle portion, that portion is stepped back. We add plantings, it's stepping back between 5 and 15 feet, depending on where you're looking at the facade. We want to also look at the roof plan. We added a couple of dimensions on here, but essentially we want to make sure that it's understood that the penthouse, whether it's the screen wall on the west side or the actual penthouse mechanical room, they're all stepped back substantially from the facade. So on the north, it's about 45 feet. On the east, it's about 22. On the south, all the way to the property line is about 60. And on the west, that's about 35 feet. So that, again, that stepping continues all the way up the building just to preserve access to light and view for the neighbors. And now I want to get into the material palette here. So the material palette is very rich. It's high quality materials on the facade in keeping with the design guidelines. And it also relates very much to the St. Julian. In fact, the base is utilizing the same mixture of cleft sandstone that is used on the St. Julian. There's a lot of mix in here that people could read all the details, but essentially that's the cleft red sandstone. At the middle that you'll see where the balconies are for the guest rooms, that is all limestone. It's either looked at honed or as cleft. And then at the top, we're looking at this metal panel. That's this zinc metal panel. That's, again, a very high quality product. And so we really are enhancing not only with the articulation of the form and massing, but also with the materiality, this base middle top articulation. And that can be seen not only on Kenyon Boulevard, but this is really thinking of this project from all 4 sides. So that is even on the west side at the passage. And then if we go to the next slide, we mentioned this already, but there's that base middle top on the north. And I think it's worth noting that we're paying a special extra attention to the east facade. We're using high quality materials there as well. Where we butt up adjacent to the property line, there's a constructability concern there. So rather than using limestone or metal panel or stone that is clad, we're utilizing a high quality CMU, they call it. And this is, it is ground face and filled. So it almost looks like limestone, but it's CMU. And that way, when we get to construction, the contractors can build that from our side of the property rather than the other side with limited impact on the other side. So I think that is worth noting. And I think all of these enhance that base metal top. I think it's also worth mentioning again that in order to enhance the solar and visual access to the ground level, we've provided expansive glazing. I think that is worth showing yet again. We have this enhanced glazing, we're meeting the requirements, but perhaps what might even be additionally important is that the conference facility is on the glass, and we don't just have glazing, we have folding doors, so you can open up that space and have that visual and also physical connection to the street. And sort of the icing on the cake is that we're trying to introduce vegetation in the gaps in where we have roofs that will be on top of the roof at the connector. And I want to go back to the other view one more time. We also have that along the alley at the balconies and at the step back roof again. So I think that is worth noting. Covering this at a high level, but closing remarks, I think it's really important to remember that today's presentation is to focus on and address the design guidelines and how our building relates to those guidelines. In light of the recent correspondence from some adjacent neighbors to the east, we felt it would be important to provide some historical context and just wanted to briefly touch upon that. This project was planned for back in 2002, and the project to the east was planned subsequent to that. And through their initial approvals, the building largely had a blank wall on their west facade, understanding that this 55-foot tall building would be constructed at some time in the future. And through their design review process with the city recommended the need for a more articulated west facade, not knowing how long it would take for that proposed structure to be built. Articulated, not fenestrated necessarily. A condition of approval from the planning department was for the developer, applicant, or owner to record a declaration of use with the understanding that a 55-foot building would be built to the west in the future. Well, it's taken longer than anticipated to figure this out, the viability. We talked about COVID, we've talked about all these other challenges. We're really committed to this. We still have an agreement in place with the City of Boulder to bring this to fruition. So with that, I just really want to thank everyone for our opportunity to present to you and look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So before we get into the Design Advisory Board questions and then discussion, I'd like to hear from the public, but before that, I think everybody probably already knows the kind of the role that DAB plays. When I say DAB, I mean the Design Advisory Board. But just for review, so DAB is an advisory board, which is kind of in our name, and we review architectural design features that are at the request of the planning board and the city council, and related to criteria contained in the downtown urban design guidelines and the site review criteria. So that's what we review. That's what Matt was talking about a little bit, kind of going through this, is the kind of things that we're looking at. So we'll be discussing these as we go through this, specifically two of them, but if other ones come up in the discussion, then those are ones that we'll also talk about within our time frame. But I think it's important to note that the DAB doesn't approve or deny projects. We really advise the staff and in this case, the planning board on these design features that are contained within these guidelines. So we also don't review engineering, we don't review zoning, we don't review parks and engineering. But within the context of what we do review, we really welcome public comment, and to the extent we can, we'll try to address those comments within the context of what we're sort of the direction that we're given. So hopefully that's clear enough for people to kind of get into this. So So I think what we'll do now is kind of open this up to the public hearing, to the public comment. So I'll let Amanda kind of walk people through that so that you all have a good idea of what's about to happen.
Sure, thank you, Todd. So if anybody would like to speak, now is the time to raise your hand in Zoom, and I will give you the opportunity to unmute and to also speak. And for anybody, also, if you could please display your full name, or the name that you're commonly known by, as stated in our rules of decorum, please do so before I call on you. So it looks like we've got a few people with their hands up, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll call Catherine Gassman first. Let's see.
Unmute.
There she goes.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry. I haven't done a webinar for a while. Yes, my name is Catherine Gassman. I live in the adjacent building, 1077 Canyon Boulevard. I think there has been some confusion about the address. 1095 is the commercial side, I think, but my address is 1077. I'm in Unit 210. I just have a couple concerns, and I apologize if it may be outside the scope of the Design Advisory Board. I've never spoken at a meeting, and I'll just try to share my comments. A couple comments I have is about the traffic. I don't quite understand the egress and access for this building. Where the design, I'm looking on, I think it's page A101, and how you describe the pedestrian walkway. 10th Street right there is really used by the St. Julian as a service entrance. Generally, there is no traffic that comes through there, and 9 times out of 10, you'll see in the course of the day that there are delivery trucks, trash trucks, eco-cycle trucks. So I don't quite understand where this particular building, and now the St. Julian, if you build a pedestrian access there, will be actually doing all of its service-related work. So I think the traffic in that small alleyway has become a big problem. Our garage is on the alley, and then the building, I don't know the building that sits on Walnut, their access garage is also in that way. Plus there's a series of parking spaces back there. So it's a pretty tight space. And when there is a truck, it is a 1-lane alleyway. So traffic is a concern. The pedestrian access is concerned. And I'm still just a little bit concerned about the light and views and the closeness of the proposed building to the west side of our building. Those are my comments.
Okay. Thank you. So we won't respond to those individually, but hopefully they'll come up in our discussion. So thank you for your comment, Catherine.
Great. Okay, next up is Tatiana Thibault. Tatiana, you should be able to unmute.
Yes.
You have 3 minutes, okay?
Yes, Tatiana Thibault, and I want to thank you, board, to be here and giving your time to get our comments. Yes, it's 1077 Canyon. Number 1095 is misleading. So is the name of the building misleading? It's not the civic building. It's a building mostly for the profit. So I think the name has to be changed to not mislead the public. Second, I live on the 4th floor of the building facing west. My bedroom, my office, my living room, my kitchen, my dining room facing west. And this proposed building blocking my view. It's not just blocking the view, it's actually taking away my daylight and the possibility to enjoy my home. And when Matt said, they put this building or proposing the building to respect to the neighbors, this was laughable. This is no consideration to us. There are no respect to the Arete. The Arete, one of the most beautiful buildings in downtown Boulder, and it's set to the profound destruction. You erecting this wall just inches away from the west of our building, inches. They're not even easement assessment for cleaning our windows, repair our balconies. There are no even way to manage the water system in a way if there snowfall and snow accumulated on the second floor decks. It's just so many issues, so many red flags, and just sitting there and saying, in respect to the neighbors, there was no consideration and respect given to the neighbors. We are, and it's again, we're talking about windows and appearance of this proposed building. What about appearance of the most beautiful building downtown? You disturbed the appearance of our building. You're talking about the windows of appearance of this new proposed building. What about the building next door? You're blocking on the balcony and touching the walls. I mean, I would just honestly would like to ask you a question. If it was your home, if you would live here in this building at the Arete, would you propose this construction? Would you erect the wall few inches away from your windows and balcony? I'm done. Thank you for your consideration and listening.
Thank you very much.
All right, next up we have a Cindy. I don't have a last name. Cindy, I'll allow you to talk if you'd like to go ahead and state your full name when you unmute.
Hi, my name is Cindy Lindsay. I'm also a resident of the Arete at 1077 Canyon. I have pretty much the same concerns that have been expressed here. I did have one question about how trucks will unload in the back. I can't tell from the drawings if there's actually a recessed area where they would back in and get out of the alleyway. So that's a concern. Just the general traffic in the alleyway is already busy. And so some consideration needs to be given to the design to accommodate whatever. This is after the construction is complete and it's being used as perhaps a wedding venue or a conference center or something like that. Will they be able to unload food and unload chairs and tables and whatever else they're using in the facility without blocking the alleyway? And then I did submit a question about viewing from the top of the building on the west side of your building, I'm sorry, the east side of your building, the west side of our building, to really understand the distances between each of the floors of the two buildings, because it appears that the lower floors are almost completely blocked, both from views and light. And then as it goes up a little higher, there's more of a separation, but still, especially for the units that are on the back of the Arete, the building will basically completely block the view. So it'd be very useful to see an explanation of how the setbacks that you've been talking about actually allow the Arete to still have the views that they have. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
Great. Next up we have Dennis, apologies about the last name, Johanningmeyer.
Did you raise your hand?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Is that correct?
Yes.
And great job, Amanda. And thank you, everybody, for your time today. It's very important and stressing the emotional rules at the very front end really have come to light, because it is an emotional situation for us residents at the Arete, and I'm a resident at the Arete also. I've got a couple questions that perhaps can be discussed down through the process, and a couple comments. The first comment is really related to the 10th Street corridor. I do it felt like there was a strong emphasis of capturing the elements, but in fact, that 10th Street corridor, as Cass pointed out, walks by trash cans, service areas, and certainly would like that to be clarified. Simply, and I'm an accountant, not an architect, why wouldn't that walkway have been placed between the arete and this proposed structure? That seems to be more congruent with maintaining the 10th Street passageway. And I would appreciate some commentary about that as we go through it. The other thing I noticed was that the 55 feet height of the building that was approved in the somewhat defensive posture that presented in 2002 does not include the 10.2 feet on top of that, which is apparently part of the roof. I don't know if not being an architect, whether that should be considered or not, but it seems to me that one layman's viewpoint is that's a 65-foot building. So I would really much appreciate that. The other question I had was it seemed as the plans were proposed that there was some type of exhaust area that needed to be opened from the garage. And I'm not quite sure how that fits in what I would call the setback from the arete. Reviewing my notes here. The other thing that I want to thank is Shannon for sending over the plans that were labeled SI 1999-12, and they had some real interesting civic use descriptions. I would sure like to know whether the civic use descriptions are going to be consistent, and if they're not, I would also like commentary if that civic use center will be available to the hotel. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dennis.
Great, thank you. We have someone on the phone. I'm gonna allow you to unmute, but if you could please state your full name when you do so.
Hello, this is Mark McGaldy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mark.
All right, I have several concerns. One concern is the alley is very crowded. If our building would catch on fire and there was all this traffic here, it'd be pretty difficult for a fire truck to get down that alley and help and put out fire in our building. I think that that's very important. It's a safety issue in my mind. And I also wonder about, and I'm just telling you from my own experience. My wife and I own a place on Maxwell Street that we ran out, and we were going to put a garage on there, but because we would have to do something, it would impact the view of the guy next to us, and we were turned down to put that garage in. Now, that was just a single family dwelling, and this unit that you're going to build is going to impact the view of 4 or 5 people here, and it's all going to affect the pricing of our units, which is going to be quite effective, and it's going to affect all our bottom lines. I'm not sure that anyone has thought about that when they decided to do this, but those are my concerns.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have John Mahaffey, followed by Deborah.
Go ahead, John.
John, I believe you're unmuted. You should be able to speak.
Maybe he stepped
And
away.
and if not, we can come back to him. We can, if Deborah, I'm gonna call on you next. Deborah Felon.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Deborah McGaldy, Deborah Phelan McGaldy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for your time. I wanted to join some of the concerns of my fellow residents at the Arrett about the congestion in the alley, which is already kind of a nightmare, frankly, trying to get in and out of there some days between the delivery trucks for the Julian and for the adjacent office building, the trash, people just parking there randomly, and routing more traffic into what is essentially the driveway to our homes is going to create an even more, not only inconvenient, but potentially dangerous situation. Another concern, the views are a real concern. Property values in Boulder are a real concern. It should not be dismissed, but there are safety issues at play as well. And one of the concerns I have is if there's going to be bathrooms on the first floor, ground level of this building, if it's just going to create a situation in which yet more unhoused individuals are going to be heading into that building to use the bathroom, whatnot, adding to an already very serious and largely unaddressed problem that we as residents have been experiencing in our area with trespassing, with harassment, and in fact, violent physical assault, which happened to a friend of ours who was visiting us. Reported to the police, had the person on camera, doesn't matter, apparently. So I see that as being even more of a factor with yet another building. And there was an issue made early on by the developer that these plans for something predated the structure that we live in, our building, our residence. But I don't know that anyone could have foreseen, we certainly didn't when we bought, could have foreseen that such a massive structure looming over all of our residences would be erected in such a just damaging way, frankly, to all of our quality of life, to our property values, and to the enjoyment of our homes. I've lived in Boulder long enough to know, as my husband just pointed out, we had personally a project shut down because of neighbor objection. Neighbors carry a lot of weight in Boulder. I sure hope that it will be the case here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. I'm going to come back to, oh, I'm just kidding. It disappeared. Let's see. Next up is Jane Einber, followed by Dan.
I'm going to speak. This is Mitch Ember, Jane's wife, Jane's husband. Anyway, I don't want to repeat what our neighbors have said, and we agree with everything that's been said. We live in the Arrett Unit 205, right in the middle of the building in the alley, facing the Exeter building, 1050 Walnut. And we've been here 12 years. We've actually calmed down a lot of the issues in the alley over the years, working with the city, by them putting a delivery zone, by them enforcing more. Some people realized before they put in the signs for just the delivery areas that they could just park their car and go to work for 8 hours and come back and drive their car home and not be bothered, not get ticketed. This was 12 years ago. It's all settled down very well in the alley. My concerns are mainly during the construction phase. It's important that the be maintained as a through alley. They can come in to the alley and then they can go out around the entrance to the parking structure by the Julian and get out. If that gets blocked off at all, we're going to have people backing up, trying to turn around in the narrow alley, all the backup OSHA backup noises and everything else, because our balcony is right there. We keep the doors open. We live here, and that's it's our home. We are in a no smoking zone for the city, so I hope that you require that whoever's working on the project, that they enforce that they keep it non-smoking. Where are they going to load materials and everything? I'm concerned with the disruption in the alley, among everything else that people have said. As far as the civic use, and I know that's been bandied around, like I said, we've lived here 12 years. I would like to see a very hard, detailed list of what is not going to be allowed in that civic use project, and no judgment, but is it going to be allowed to be used as a homeless, as a shelter on a cold night if they need the space, or is it going to be not allowed? So I think it's important to have a list of what is not allowed. And I think everything else has been covered. So appreciate the time, and hopefully you guys will consider it. It is residences on the second, third, and fourth floor on the west side of our building. It is not commercial that's being blocked. It's residential. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mitch.
Great. We have one more hand raised at the moment. It's Dan Dietzler.
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I live in Unit 201, which is on the second floor in the, call it southwestern corner of the Arete, 1077 Canyon. Been there for 12 years, first occupant. My wife and I enjoy it. We patronize the St. Julian and enjoy Boulder. My concerns are that there's no gap between the proposed new structure and the Arete, or my unit. Obviously, views will be blocked, but I think the concern that I have is that normally you maintain some type of a corridor for, as was mentioned earlier, not just maintenance, but fire protection and ingress and egress. My unit has a lot of windows on the west side, and by the construction of this building, if my unit is then non-compliant with the code with respect to the open window area for ventilation, etc., and light, then you're rendering my property, uninhabitable, so to speak. So I did meet with Bruce a few days back, and I invited Bruce to come over and see from the inside of my unit what this situation, what the proposed development would create for me. And he's like, he didn't want to do that, and so I don't think that they're being fully transparent or honest when they say that they care about our property to the east. Finally, my concern is that the units that St. Julian's proposing, 39, will be for extended stay. And these units, people will have the ability to cook on hot plates, and perhaps they'll put some stove in there or something. But these are not the people that are going to patronize the restaurants locally. They're typically on an expense account, and they're going to just stay in their unit or whatever. There are other places around Boulder where extended stay units could be constructed, and I think would benefit the entire area more than putting them right there where we already have 3 restaurants that have gone out of business, partly due to the pandemic, and they've not come back. So I'm not sure that there's a demand for these extended stay units. And gosh, we go through all of this, you build it, and then it's not occupied, not utilized. We all lose. So those are my comments at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Great. Let me just double check. I don't see any other hands raised at the moment. Okay.
Okay, I think we'll close the public participation. I did get a message that someone on the staff wants to respond to some of the public participation comments. So who would that be?
Thanks so much, Chair. I'm Charles Farrow, Senior Planning Manager for Planning and Development Services. And I just wanted to thank everybody for their testimony and for taking the time to be here this evening and for the feedback. I just wanted to make a couple of quick notes just on the process moving forward. We are very early on in the process, and to the chair's comments earlier tonight, really Dab's role this evening is to focus specifically on architecture, building design, and how the building's design kind of interfaces with the downtown design guidelines. All of the issues related to traffic, fire, access, noise, and other potential impacts from the use will be addressed as we move through the subsequent planning board process. All of this is eventually going to culminate before with a public hearing before the planning board. So there are going to be many more opportunities for neighbors to plug in and participate in the process. So tonight is really not kind of the final say. We're very early on in the process. And we'll continue to keep the neighbors apprised at every step of the process as it moves forward. So just wanted to note that this evening that this is kind of far from fully cooked, and there's still going to be a lot of opportunity for the project to evolve, for the interfaces between the two to evolve. Wanted to thank all of the neighbors again for their testimony this evening. So thanks again.
Thank you, Charles. So I see Bruce has his hand up. I don't, trying to figure out how to incorporate that. Bruce, did you want to respond to the comments, or can we kind of hold off on that until we get into the discussion? You're muted, by the way.
I don't want to respond to comments so far as just to make some design comments acknowledging your focus and Charles' focus that it should be design oriented related, not planning department, city council related. So if I can just take 30 seconds to make 2 points, is that we took many years to get the St. Julian off the ground, and we've developed and operated a 4-star, 4-diamond property that has been a great enhancement to downtown, to Boulder in general. And we wouldn't do anything that civic use or otherwise that would diminish that. And that's design related, which is also factoring in the operations, et cetera. And as far as design, it really should be noted that the developer to the east signed a declaration of use acknowledging that a building up to 55 feet would be built adjoining it. And its original design had no windows. It was a blank wall. And it was the planning board comments that said, why don't you look at changing that elevation? Because the building that's going up next to you could take a while, it could take a number of years. And that, even though I know that's historic perspective, but that really is an important point. And that's, and I thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks. So DAB members, before we get into the discussion, do you have any questions for probably Matt regarding the earlier discussion about the project? Do you have any clarifying questions?
I have some clarifying. They're probably rhetorical, but I want to get it out there in public record. Are both of these, the Arrett and this property, 0 lot line properties? Would be first question A. And then Bruce alluded to, it sounds like the planning board stepped in and wanted facade treatment of, I assume, a 0 lot line on the Arrett property by adding windows and access and setting it back, knowing full well that someone could build a building right next to it. So I wanted some clarification of that. You know, is that indeed true? These are both 0 lot lines. And what happened with that, you know, from the planning staff perspective, if we could have a little bit of just quick, like on that agreement and, why that was seen as a good idea, knowing that people someday would have a building right next to their windows.
Should I answer one of those, or how do you want?
I was hoping to hear
that?
from planning staff,
Okay.
maybe, if they have answered those questions. And I would love to hear from you too, Matt. And then,
Sure.
and then you had alluded also that you had tried to address that with a setback or something. I just wanted to understand what that was. But first, I want to hear from planning, like what's the history of why windows were allowed to be put on a 0 lot line building.
Shannon, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so the minimum setback for both these properties is the 0 foot side lot line. My understanding is that at the time that the ARET building was going through the process, that is correct. Originally, it was designed with no windows on that side. There was a desire through the review process to add more design to that facade that included windows. So that did go forward, and there was a declaration of use that was required to be recorded that noted that a 55-foot tall building could be built on the adjacent property, and that was recorded on the ARET property to notify future property owners that could take place.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe Matt, just a question of, you had alluded to that you were trying to do something to mitigate that a bit, and I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard unless I pull up the screen, but essentially
Sure.
on the, do you want me to do so? Okay.
Sure.
Do that. Give me a second. Let me pull up, I'm actually going to pull up our model and spin this around a little bit. So this is the model. We grabbed your context and put that all into place. And what you'll see when you really look at this in 3D is that the building is set back wherever we can do it. And so we have this corner set back. And so, for instance, let's say a view from one of the terraces in that corner, they still get light and view. There's still a setback, even though we have the use by right to go to a 0 setback. Sorry, here we go. So they still maintains a view of the Flatirons. They still get light and view. They still get ventilation, especially at the southeast and at the, sorry, let me go back to this. Especially at the southeast and also at the northeast corners where they are cut back to maintain those views and maintain as much separation as we reasonably can, given the structural complications that we spoke to earlier.
And Matt, would you have any sense of how much you guys are giving up in terms of square footage and property value by not building out your full build out?
That's a great question. We haven't, Jen is on the call as well. We haven't identified the exact loss of square footage, but Jen, I don't know if you have that off the top of your head. If not, I can just identify those in plan here, or actually I'm going to switch back to the other diagram. I think this might be a little bit easier. But you can see this corner is cut out here and then that corner is cut out there. If I were, approximating, we're probably about 350 square feet per level on this corner. And it's reduced here. It's probably about 100 to 150 square feet per level at that corner. And then we're set back here, which is probably about 2 by 25. So that's 50 per level all the way up.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I'm doing public math, Stephen. Sorry, I apologize, but that's approximately what we're losing by creating those setbacks.
Okay, great.
Any other questions for Matt? Clarifying questions that maybe weren't picked up in the presentation or need more clarity from Dab? I do have one question that Matt, you may be able to answer, but can you go back to that kind of roof view of your building and then and then the one to the west?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, move over a little, keep going. I'm sorry, east. I'm looking at the roof view of
the building on the east?
Yeah, east, yours and the one east of yours.
Okay, sure.
Sorry, I got my directions mixed up.
It's all good.
It's a Midwest thing. So my question is, the units in this 1077 building, that when people were talking about the impact, the potential impact, some of them were facing west, some of them were facing north, and some of them were facing south. So can you tell by the roof, are there units basically facing north and units facing south? Are there just 2 units per along that floor plan on their building? In other words, is anybody only facing west?
Is it that one? I do not know the answer to. Bruce or Jen, I don't know if you know if there's a unit center mask along the west that's only facing west.
I have not seen a floor plan for levels 2 and 3. I've only seen a few of the commercial spaces below, and I do not believe any are fully west facing, but I could be incorrect in stating that.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yeah, if I can interject, from what I know, there's 2 residential units on each of the Arete floors, 2 and 3. My understanding is the 4th floor unit of the Tebow's is 1 unit along the whole west facade, facing north and south. That takes up like 5,600 square feet.
Okay. Great, thank you. Any other clarifying questions from Deb? Yes, Brendan.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that we need to discuss on this building, and while I am sympathetic to the situation with the 0 lot line and the Arete, I do want to make sure that, as a design review board, that's not really in our purview. Just so to speak. It is also not really within, I think, the guidelines and the elements that we need to be discussing. So I'm kind of hoping that we can jump into the items that are on our list that we need to check through.
Right.
And again, I'm sympathetic to the situation of the units in the Arete that will be blocked. It's unfortunate. However, I do have one clarifying question on, it's a little bit unclear for the new civic use building. My understanding is that there's just an agreement with the city and St. Julian. But can I get a little more clarification on what are some potential programmatic uses for that space? Like,
Bruce, can I?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Brendan. Bruce, could you answer those questions?
Yeah, sure. Again, as they were all intended to be meeting spaces for private nonprofits. Again, we didn't want to do anything, even from the very beginning, for the first discussions of civic use. It couldn't be anything detrimental to the neighborhood or to the existing hotel. So there is no food banks, there's no homeless shelters, et cetera, et cetera. The private nonprofits, and there's a list of them, and there were agreements. So there's not things like fraternities that might be nonprofit cannot meet there. There's a whole list of things that we would find detrimental. The hotel, the private nonprofits have a preferential ability to schedule things, and then if the space is not being reserved, then the hotel can book meetings in the same space. So it's if there's any concerns about something that's would harm the neighborhood or harm the existing hotel, the those concerns are not founded.
I think I'm asking more from the standpoint of, are these users, are they sharing sort of the occupant load with the hotel, or are these people all parking in the garage and coming up in?
Oh,
I'm sort of asking more from the perspective of where are all these people coming from that will be using the space.
Well, for one thing, it's not unfortunately, it's not a huge amount of space. 6,500 square foot ballroom. Again, there's some supporting uses, but that's a little bit larger than what we have currently at the St. Julian as far as the largest room. And yeah, I think there's the 10th Street connector that as basically comes across from the library, is between the garage entry and what was the Med building. There's the garage. Certainly people would park in the I think many users would park in the garage and take the elevator up or the stairs up, as they currently do. And so yeah, there could be users that are staying at the hotel. It's for the private nonprofits, it's generally intended to be local civic groups. So either people are already living here, can take mass transit. If they drive, my understanding is the 10th, the garage that's underneath the hotel is one of the more underutilized garages in the city. So there's plenty of parking for other groups coming in.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're good. Okay, so we have two issues that we've been asked to review. The first one is Downtown Urban Design Guidelines 2.2C regarding the maintenance of human scale rather than monolithic or monumental scale. And that is on the south-facing facade. And the other issue is the site review criteria regarding the entry points that are not within 50 feet of each other. So, but before we get into those two, I'm wondering if DAB members are there other criteria that you would like to discuss that you think are relevant to our discussion?
Yeah, Todd, I do have one comment.
Okay.
And I think to answer your question, and there was some attention and description of the alleyway facade included in the applicant's presentation. But I do think as we're walking around, we have two main issues to cover. If we can just have a brief discussion about circulation as it relates to the alley side, mainly for pedestrians. I just would like to get a little more familiar with how people are going through this circuit through diagonally, kind of through the buildings there. Not being completely familiar with the backside of some of the architecture that's just north of this proposal, I think it might be helpful just to get a walk through the model and understand how that works spatially. But again, I think in terms of material and massing, it seems like adequate attention has been given to that that facade as a principal facade, not as an afterthought.
Okay. Any other specific criteria that the DAB members think we should talk about? I have two, and I want you to tell me whether you think they're relevant. One is 2.2B and the other one is 2.1B in the design criteria. Is there a way that we can pull up those two criteria?
Is that from your side, Todd, or did you want us to pull that up?
If you have the design criteria that's actually in our packet, do you have that? Or
Jen, can you I'll stop sharing. Can you pull those up?
I do not have that packet up. I have our checklist pulled up, so let me look for that document. Or Shannon, is that something that you would have readily available?
Pull that up.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kalani.
It's giving me, I'm having it load right now, Todd. So if you can continue on the other ones, I can still pull it up.
Okay. So while we're pulling that up, if it's okay with DAB members, I would like to start with the second issue that we're being asked to review, which is regarding the defined entryways. So Matt described the constraints they have regarding the building and the floodplain and all of that, so that these two entryways at each end of the structure are more than 50 feet apart, and that is under criteria H3A, Roman numeral 4. Are DAB members comfortable with that added distance, or do you think that there's another way to do this? That seems like a relatively easy one to talk about.
Yeah, if Matt, if you could pull up your model again.
Sure. Yeah, let me pull that up and spin around here. Is this a good view? Does this work?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the distance between on the right where his cursor is over to on the left. Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, that he made a pretty convincing technical argument. I wonder, Matt, did you look at maybe having some kind of walk along there on the front and steps down so that right around, you can't see my cursor, like sort of to the left of where those two people are, right? Yeah, kind of
sure, somewhere like, let's say there. The challenge, it's a good point, Stephen. We looked at a variety of strategies, including seeing if we could project stairs beyond that wall and down to grade. But technically, because of the floodplain, we're not there's a couple of instances or criteria that don't allow us to do that. One is floodplain, and the other is we have to float it. So both of those are limiting our ability to add anything new, if that makes sense. And so what we've tried to do is enhance that access, enhance this, even though it's more so an egress point, enhance it with vegetation. And I mentioned this earlier, but just to make sure people got a grasp of this, is the conference facility is in the middle, and we've added nanowalls so that that can open up. I know it's not an access entrance, but we're trying to do what we can to supplement based on those limitations.
Yeah.
So Stephen, are you good with
I'm good with it. I think that obviously the front setback doesn't allow certain things to happen that could, but yeah, I don't think it's out of alignment or out of character with what else is happening on the street there.
Okay. And Matthew, Rory?
Yeah, just to clarify, the principal access to the ground force civic space is obviously on the west, right?
Correct. Yes, it is access from this sort of convergent point, whether you're coming from the hotel or the garage or otherwise, and then you access it directly to the west side of the building from that passageway.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, that nexus of the ramp there, the passageway, the archway, the massing of the building rounding off at that point it clearly signifies more of the primary entrance, and that more easterly, the southeast exit looks like a convenience exit to me, or convenience access. So I would agree that if we're looking at that criteria, I think this is acceptable, and that this entrance does a good job of mixing circulation and massing and other kind of signifiers that point it as the main primary entrance.
If I might add, we are not allowed to add bike parking along this canyon side due to the high floodplain, the high hazard zone. There's also not an area for cars to pull over and allow people to exit a vehicle. So it really is a very transient, busy street, and there's really not an opportunity for anyone to park on this side of the building and walk in from a midpoint. So truly, all of our circulation is coming from that west side.
To that point, I mean, it seems like the characterization is that for the hotel use and the civic use, am I correct in understanding that the most of the foot traffic will come from, let's say, the parking garage or the parking drop-off at the Julian, and that there is really no pedestrian drop-off design for this component? Direct pedestrian drop-off?
That is correct. Between Canyon Boulevard and the existing alleyway, there is no opportunity to allow a drive lane or a drop-off lane. The existing parking garage is above grade, so we don't have an opportunity to provide an area where a car could conceivably pull over the parking garage and have a side lane to do so. So the concept here is that all traffic would be coming mainly from the parking garage or from a bicycle or from pedestrian traffic.
And I'd add, Matt, that if somebody were taking an Uber or Lyft or rideshare otherwise, they would be dropped off at the St. Julian or perhaps further down Walnut. There are a few options. I mentioned how there's sort of a spaghetti of circulation, but to Jen's point, there can't really be any car access off of Canyon. It's simply perhaps pedestrian crossing Canyon or coming along the sidewalk.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that, it's interesting the way Boulder has interpreted flood rules, because while they are federal rules, they're mandated locally. In other words, the local municipality actually has jurisdiction to override some of them. And if there were certain circumstances, they could do that. Hence New Orleans, right? You would have nothing there. And so if there are moments that wanted to be done and you guys wanted to push for that, that would be within Boulder's local jurisdiction. They've been reluctant to do that in the past. They sort of like their heels in the ground with floodplain issues, but that is within sort of our local world if we wanted to do certain things.
So getting back to the question about these two entryways, DAB members, are any of you uncomfortable with the distance, or can we put that one to bed?
Well, I think that there are a couple of questions within that question, not just the distance of the entry. I think that the entry that's on the east on Canyon it's primarily egress. I mean, I think that it is appropriately set back from the street. It's not a primary entrance. It's not something that we want necessarily people to be drawn to as an entry. I think that having that curve feature and the wider stair is inviting to where the entry naturally wants to be. The only concern I have is there's that roof element that's happening, sort of setting up the arches going down that promenade. And it's kind of created a spine and a wall that's severing and blocking, maybe hiding the entry doors. And I'm wondering if there's a way that that those doors could, either that spine wall could be shortened, or the doors could be pulled out so that they're more visible, so that, you know, if you're coming around that curve, you could actually see where the entrance is. And there's 2 sets of doors there. It's a little bit confusing. I think the way it's, I think that there's that sheet, R1.01 site plan shows the 2 sets of doors. But it's, you know, one door is, the double doors are definitely more prominent than that single door. But yet it's kind of being hidden by that spine wall. So I would suggest somehow making that, is that roof element necessary? Is there another way that could be treated as, you know, celebrating the entry to the civic space instead of kind of blocking and hiding it, but making it a little bit more prominent? And then the second part of that question, I think, is has to do with the floodplain. Or Todd, trying to break those up?
No, go ahead.
So when we're talking about that, the wall that's sitting underneath the Juliet balcony and the doors going into the civic, the operable partition wall, I think that's a great way to engage the space onto Canyon. I mean, you're literally opening up the walls, you know, onto that Canyon Street, and I think it has fantastic engagement. I would like to see, one thing I think that's really working on the landscaping for the St. Julian is these sort of tiered landscape islands and landscape walls. Is there a possibility to build some type of tiered landscaping, or you know, just to break the height of that base wall, to make it feel a little more, again, human scale? Is there a way within that setback in the floodplain to, you know, integrate some planting beds or landscape walls or some type of tiered, just to kind of soften that facade a little bit?
Yeah, can you be more specific for me which facade you're talking about softening? Because are we still talking about the entryways, or are we getting into the facade discussion?
No, I'm talking about, so there's a question of the south, you know, underneath the operable doors and windows with the Juliet balcony. So with the awning those white awnings that we're looking at that are sticking out in the floodplain, that wall, that just straight flat stone wall that's sitting underneath the window bay, if there's a way to you know, bring that floor line, like tear it down with additional landscaping. Right now it's just showing like a patch of flat grass. I'm just wondering if there's some way to integrate kind of the planting beds that you can see on the St. Julian side, like just west of the stair. I don't know how to draw on this, otherwise I'd point it out.
Can we draw on this? I don't know if, can you see?
There's the annotate button at the top.
So it is drawn. Oh, okay, it is.
Yeah, how do you do that, Stephen?
So somewhere, where did I see it? Yeah, at the top, it said annotate. Of course, now I can't clear.
So that is considered the high hazard zone. We have reached out to traffic and researching what landscape would be available to put in that area. We were told we're not allowed to plant anything that would disrupt flow waters or floodwaters, excuse me. So we might be able to get away with some minimal grasses. but shrubs and lots of plantings, I am not sure if that is something that we'd be able to do. With regards to fixed planters, we've talked internally about stepping back windows a foot or so that we could have maybe draping plants that go over that wall in that corner right there. And how can we articulate softening that corner with more of a landscaped edge, but we're very limited on what is allowed within that turf zone that you see along Canyon right now, based on the high hazard zone. But that is something that we're looking into what our options might be, just to help break up that long wall.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this, this nice landscape island. If that was possible to have some type of a tiered landscape bed or something to kind of to break up, this is just tall, and you can see, compared to a human, it's a big wall before you start sort of the engagement here with these operable doors and windows. And then you have this planting bed, which it doesn't have the same kind of human scale or interaction or whimsy, I think, that is really working with the St. Julian. And I would like to see maybe something, like these planting beds over here pulled into this. This is pretty high up. It's not really something that people on the sidewalk can experience in any way. I mean, it's almost a story above your head. So I would like to see that maybe revisited.
That corner of the building is existing. That is parking garage below. So
yeah, just to be clear, Jennifer, on Google Earth, we can see this. So the wall, the stone wall and the cast cap already exist. And that is essentially the deck of the parking garage. So that is structured below, correct?
That is correct.
That's right.
So I think that's important just to understand, everyone on DAB, and it literally is touching the adjacent building to the east right now. And so that's the ability to, I'm actually curious, how are you able to carve that stair into it at that location if you're describing?
So that was anticipated in the original civic use building. And so this was already cast in place. There's a void there that can't be seen currently if you pass by it. But that was conceived for the original one when it was built in 2003 and 4.
Are there any additional voids that were anticipated along that facade?
No, there were voids for elevators further in the back, in close proximity to this one. And there, if you go down into the garage, you can see a lot of what's going on there, but nothing along the street is there. So if just for a second, I'll pull up the diagram that I showed earlier. This is really the only structure, so you can see that carve out for the stairs, and then this carve out here.
Can you go ahead and stop? Can you reshare the?
Oh, sure.
We're still seeing the model.
Yeah, let me share the screen. Hopefully that will work better. Let's see. Does this work now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. So these are the structural diagrams I showed earlier. That's the floodplain wall, if you will, and you can see the notch out for the stairs on the west side, and then this is a notch anticipating the stairs that we're talking about, and then this cutout here is really for the garage exhaust. So if I go back to the other one, and let me know if you lose me on it, that is what is here. So there's a question about garage exhaust. These are here. We're not moving them. We're working with them, and we actually saw it as an opportunity to help set the building back. So that is there, and then we have the planting in front of it. One thing, Brennan, that you brought up is there perhaps a way to lower this planting? So that's something that we can look at with our landscape architect and see how low can we get it and still make sure that the vegetation can thrive, but it's essentially sitting right on the slab.
It might be worth talking about the entry and how we've already internally discussed how we can improve the primary entry, and what we might do at that location to increase the intuitive nature of what entry is and where it is. We've talked about maybe introducing a vertical element outside of that fin wall you were discussing. So there's a pair of, you know, making that a double door, and maybe even paring back the curved room form so that that's not blocking the entry as much. And that is definitely something that we have been looking at, and we'll continue to do so. We agree that, you know, there's an opportunity there to increase the visual nature of what entry looks like outside of the covered roof, so that that's something that as you're coming along the sidewalk or canyon, that where entry is clearly denoted by the architecture, and so that is something we will definitely be working as we take your comments and make modifications.
All right, you're speaking my language. I like it.
Yeah, Brendan, Stu, thank you for that. Brendan and the rest of the DAB, I'm doing these cartoon sketches, but we agree that this fin wall isn't ideal. So we have, subsequent to this, looked at strategies, as Stu has mentioned, to eliminate that. We're also looking at this vertical expression. And one thing that we're debating internally, we're not quite sure what the right answer is, but Stu alluded to that, is should this semicircular volume be so large, or if you can imagine in plan, here's the exterior wall, maybe this vertical expression comes through and this goes over, and then this zone can become outdoor space that invites people in. We're not quite sure, but it's something in there we think might be a good fit. What we're trying to balance is what one of you mentioned earlier, is this expression signifies entry, and that's part of the reason why we did that, but it also blocks entry at the same time. So we're trying to find the right balance of signifying entry, but making it welcoming and opening, or welcoming and open, I should say.
Yeah, I wanted to make a couple suggestions along the same lines. You could look at, and I don't know that this would help, but you could look at this roof actually, and this all sort of being one expression rather than so many parts and pieces. You know, that could help designate that. And the other thing I thought I had was, you know, could there be a way that some of these columns, you know, materially come down to help break up that wall? You know, it's obviously just a veneer of stone on there, so that wouldn't be that. I don't know that would help, but maybe some, you know, quick study. I mean, the wall is kind of a continuation of what's happening on the St. Julian. And then the other thing is this zone, right? It's grass, and I know it's, you know, the flood rules, but again, like I said before, they are community based. So, you know, the only one stopping us from putting benches in here is us, not FEMA. FEMA has rules, right? But we can override them. It's just that the city's been reluctant to do it. And if there's a compelling reason, maybe we should be like, hey, really, you know, if we access this space, you know, benches along there or something could be great. You know, is that really going to do irreparable damage to our flood situation, you know, along Canyon? I don't think so.
Is there a way that we can get that kind of recorded as far as, you know, your input?
I mean,
helps.
I actually just looked it up on FEMA. I just looked it up 2 minutes ago. I'm like, oh yeah, it's community based, and that's how it's. Like I said, there's plenty of cities in this country that if they, you know, like in New Orleans, if you could only do 50% lifetime renovation on your, you know, building in the floodplain, you would never renovate anything in New Orleans, right? So you can do these things. It just has to be coming from, you know, collective will. And I'm not saying like, you know, you disregard the rules, but if they're simple things, it's really not a big deal. But
so that we don't get too detailed on this.
Sorry.
I have two recommendations on this particular issue. One is don't hide the entryway on the west side. And we've talked about various ways of treating that, but that's the recommendation. So we don't want to get any more detailed on you guys than that, just to give you more conceptually what we're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is softening the straight flat wall underneath the windows. And I think that's about as far as we really need to go. I think you guys get the idea. That's being expressed.
Also, I mean, I really was wondering sort of, where the outdoor use space is for the Civic Center. And I think the idea of making the arch exterior space instead of interior spaces would be a very interesting thing to explore.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can spare the space programmatically from the inside, I think it could be just a really cool balcony that's more engaging, but still, giving that flow to the entry.
Okay, so is there a potential outdoor use space associated with the arch?
Yeah, with the curve.
With the curve and the arch. Okay, so I would like to move on to this other question, because I think that's going to take some more time, and we're sort of at a shortage of time at this point. I don't know if Rory or Matthew want to weigh in on this particular issue, or are you guys good with it, with the recommendations that we've come up with?
I think I'm good with it. I mean, the distance of the entry, I don't think is really detrimental to this particular facade and its location. I think the fact that the east is actually egress driven, it's actually a benefit to the residential folks, because they're not having like congregating tree right outside the residential piece. But I do fully echo everybody's comments about this kind of rotunda piece on the corner. I think this is a really unique opportunity to provide some transparency through the wall on Canyon. And, it's unfortunate that the pedestrian easement has this angle, and it's unfortunate that largely it's fronted by back of house trash and whatnot, and it ends up kind of shooting you at 45 degrees to the next kind of easement until you cross up through to Walnut and then pass through Walnut, and that little pedestrian connection. But this is a huge, connecting back to the library and a huge portion of the bike path. This could be, a really nice opportunity to invite people to use this as kind of a penetrating piece into the heart of downtown. And there's not a lot of opportunity left on the wall of Canyon to do so. So everything that they described not only will help the entry read more clearly, but I think opening up and kind of advertising more transparency along Canyon is actually a benefit to kind of the city circulation.
Okay. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on. What I would like to do before I want to throw something out here that I hope that we'll have a chance to come back to. But these two issues that I think are relevant, I just want to read them to you, and I want you to think about them. And then perhaps the staff can weigh in on why they weren't considered to be relevant to our review, and why they may or may not be relevant from Deb's perspective. So 2.2b is consider the height, mass, and scale of buildings. One, in general, buildings should appear similar in height, mass, and scale to other buildings in the area. At the same time, it is important to maintain a variety of heights. While the actual heights of buildings are of concern, the perceived heights of buildings are equally important. 1, 2, and 3-story buildings make up the primary architectural fabric of the downtown, with taller buildings located at key intersections. Consider the height and proportion of buildings to neighboring structures for new structures. And I don't think we need to go into that much detail. So that is 2.2b. And then 2.1b is dealing with views. It says downtown Boulder is blessed with exceptional mountain views, and projects should be designed to preserve access to this extraordinary asset from the public realm and surrounding area. The south and west edges of downtown offer the most spectacular views. So those two to me seem relevant. But let's put those aside for a second and come back to the first issue that we need to deal with, and then we can come back to those and at least decide whether or not they're relevant. Okay, sound good? So downtown urban design guidelines 2.2C, maintain human scale rather than monolithic or monumental design, avoid large features, featureless, avoid large features, facade features. A single facade should not exceed 75 feet. So this south-facing facade, I think, as a sort of one particular issue, I think, is the question. And the 75-foot spread, I think, is what we're asked to address. But I think that within the context of that, does this facade hold up well in terms of trying to make it not one large mass?
Yeah, I've been itching to get to this one.
Okay.
If you could actually go back to that, Matt, that kind of oblique view you were just at.
Sure.
Go, yeah, kind of rotate it back. Yeah, right there. That's good.
Right there. Okay.
I think that there's maybe a reaction to kind of the massiveness of it, and honestly, I think it's the way you guys have treated these balconies and these columns. And I think that I think it could be more delicate, kind of the way the St. Julian has these balconies. And I understand why you guys want to have balconies, you know, for these units, but I think it feels a bit massive. And, you know, I'm not saying you have to follow this datum of the Arete building, but in some ways, if you were kind of doing that and you had that first level not having railings, and then you were adding, you know, bringing over this element from the St. Julian into this facade, I think it would tend to push the building back from the street a little bit. You'd still get your balconies. They'd actually be cheaper, maybe. And I think it would actually tie the St. Julian back, because this really is continuation. Yeah. And that's just kind of my thought. But I feel like it's these especially, like these four big, massive, heavy kind of columns that are flush with this front part that's kind of making it feel kind of, you know, massive. And you know, I understand balconies are, you know, everybody wants them. I don't know how much they get used, honestly, but anyways, that was my 2 cents.
Stephen, in DAB, do you mind if we explain that one? Because it's an interesting one because of the structure. Do you mind if we pull up something for that?
Sure.
Can you see this diagram here on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is that facade where you have those frames, and this goes back to the structure yet again. And so when you look at these structural grids, if you imagine that these red dashed lines are essentially the beams, this is going to be post-tension concrete, but that's where the cables will be running. And there are columns at these 4 points here. And this beam, if you will, needs to extend to each one of these columns. And then there needs to be a perimeter beam, if you will, along the facade. And I also wanted to show you, because these are good points, also want to show you that challenge. So we have these columns, the facade is set back, which we're trying to address those concerns of setback, but we're limited because of where the columns are located. So we're trying to, each one of these columns are slightly different. You don't see that on the facade, but when you look at the structure, you can see how we're reconciling those. So that became a great structural concern. There are some opportunities, for instance, you know, on the corner, in theory, we might be able to add a balcony, but that really doesn't take us in the right direction. So what we said is, okay, St. Julian is clearly a monolithic building. It has a basemental top, but is relatively flat. It has some projecting balconies that are light. The Arete on the east is more step back. It has carve outs, but also has projecting balconies. Can we marry something in between? So we tried to take the tone of the stucco from the St. Julian and from the arete and blend them together. So we're using the limestone, but then we made these very large openings. So it still erodes the mass as much as we reasonably can. We've had a lot of conversations internally about how narrow can we make those columns. We might get a few inches, but not much because of the concrete columns that they're cladding. So I don't know if that helps, at least describe the challenges that we have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good.
I mean, yeah. I totally echo, Stephen, what you were saying. My initial reaction was the same virtually. I do want to say, so you have those columns at the base that are stone. And then as you start going west, they become sort of applied facade kind of columns. I feel like there needs to be a little more of a commitment to the solid base and more of a commitment to like the structural integrity of those columns so that they're not just applied ribbons on the facade. But if you could kind of carry the weight of the what's indicated as a column. And now I do understand that you were trying to maintain the rhythm within that balcony with irregular spacing of the column layout. However, I do think there can be, there just needs to be even a slight relief on the facade. You know, for example, like when you have a section cut through the balconies on the packet, submittal packet, the detail blow up of that section cut doesn't have the stone, you know, partial height wall with the shorter balcony rail on top. It's actually just more transparent and rail. I think that there's sort of a tricky and weird transition between the cap of the stone at the base and then where those balconies begin, that there needs to be more separation and more relief, that they're really kind of almost in the same plane. And maybe looking at extending the balcony all the way down to the cap of the stone might help sort of separate those. You know, you have because when you look at that, if you zoom out and you're looking at Canyon Street, and there's a really nice sort of horizontality along that whole street that is kind of working, but there's sort of a lack of commitment maybe on this once you start going up into the second stories, because it doesn't have even a slight bit of relief between the two facades, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, maybe did you guys try round columns? Like, not like, you know, ornate, but just really simple round, you know, you might be able to capture all of the structure you need within the round column.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you guys are struggling with this, so I
No. I think both of you are bringing up great points where, you know, as I think maybe Shannon mentioned at the beginning, or perhaps there's Kalani, I can't remember. But we're early on. This is where we are. And I think, you know, there are good points about how much relief do you really need? Is it 4 inches? Is it 6? Is it 2 feet? Should this railing come down? How do we make it lighter? Can the columns get smaller, whether it's circular or chamfered, things or notched, I guess. I think those are all things that we have yet to really dial in, but they're really good points. This isn't really, it's sort of a question about Canyon, but one item that we have done on the alley, and part of what we're trying to do is not make every facade the same, but make them part of the same family. And so when we're on the alley, what we did, and these are the planters as a reminder, but we have the zinc here that might break down that frame, and maybe there's a way to make it lighter. I don't even know if that's a good idea, so I'm throwing out a little bit of a crazy idea there, but it could be a way to break up the frame so maybe the larger frame reads heavier, but the zinc starts to help make it recede and feel lighter. those are some of those ideas that we're kicking around internally that we just haven't gotten to yet.
Sure. Yeah, if you could pull the face of those columns maybe to align with where the stone walls are now, and then treat the stone below the railing differently.
Right, right.
Matt, I have a radical question for you. Since you mentioned this sort of trying to blend these two buildings. So the building to the east has these sort of cool setbacks going up to 4 floors. So is it possible that you could maintain the integrity of the columns that you have to, that sort of form this kind of structure of the building, and do setbacks like the building to the east? In other words, floor by floor, you sort of give up the lead column and you go to the back column, so that you're stepping up either once or twice to get to the top of the building. Because one of the things that makes this look massive to me is that you've got this sort of solid wall, and the building to the east is really breaks that up, not only from the front but also from the side. So it does the same thing from the side, and that I know is a clear-cut architectural feature that we look for in almost every building that we're reviewing. And so your columns may limit that to some extent, but I'm wondering if that is possible.
Can I just want to interject, Todd, just because I think this is a relevant point to bring this up. You know, the building to the east is a residential building with a residential penthouse. These are hotel rooms that also programmatically, not just structurally, need to stack. So I will do what I do sometimes here to make things more confusing for everyone, is disagree. I don't think we should be dissuading people from having what I would say is a strong facade, or a facade that uses a minimal palette over adding more materials and decorating small episodes here and there. So just for different point of view, I think I would like to voice, you know, I wouldn't go to great extremes or advise the applicants to start chipping away at the massing of this building. I mean, it is hotel rooms, they need to stack. And there's a certain monotony to that program that requires things to have this vertical presence. I don't think our president would be, you know, I would hesitate to say, take as your precedent the residential building that's next door and draw from that. I think you have to draw more, you have to favor more from the St. Julian. That's part of its complex. And you know, I think the technical question we're looking at here is to kind of opine on this 75-foot limit, which is enshrined in the design guidelines. And I would say this is an example, both practical because of the structure and visually, where I feel like the 75 is an arbitrary number. What I think is important here is there is a strong rhythm. The St. Julian has a very strong rhythm as well. You can see it just there to the west. This is a rhythm with different elements of architecture, but I think I just want to speak, you know, in support of having, it's okay to have a strong massing sometimes. And sometimes the contrast of the strong massing next to a building with an eroded massing is a nice relief. So, yeah, that's just not so organized thoughts, but that's some of them.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Matthew. I mean, an older iteration of this board used to always harken back to the Hotel Boulderado and used to talk about how, you know, if you were a historic family moving to a Western town, you built an edifice that occupied the block, and you didn't shy away from it or try to make it cute and break it into little mini storefront facades. You owned it, and that there's kind of a lacking building stock that continues to kind of honor that tradition. I also tend to think, you know, I think the diagram speaks for itself, the full canyon elevation, where we're seeing a significant portion of both the Arrête building and the existing St. Julian that are, you know, within a foot, 2 foot, you know, kind of these 86 and change versus 87 and change as far as a facade expression. So I don't think the 75, you know, again, I agree with Matthew, it's kind of an arbitrary number, and we're working with a structural grid of logic that was set up. I think for me, where it falls apart, the entire composition of this facade is the southwest corner. Like once we kind of get past the 3 strong bays that have a lot of structural logic, and there's quite a bit of proportional logic, I'd argue. I mean, I understand that your stone cap datum is slightly lower than the Arrête, but it's kind of at their the window opening height, and then what that allows you to do, because you're trying to press these floors in to fit in the height limit, that's why you're using PT. It allows you to kind of have equivalent proportions for that next layer. So each of those stories, you know, story 2 and 3, if you will, I guess technically 3 and 4 with the mezzanine, you know, are kind of reading equivalent, as opposed to trying to drag something up and then you're going to kind of throw off the balance of the vertical layering here. But then we get to this, to the left of these 3 bays, and this just looks unfinished to me. Like there's no terminus on the roof structure. The railings change directions. They go vertical versus the horizontal. We're trying to like echo this round feature up into the balconies, which we're already kind of talking about, you know, this idea of it being exciting to lop off this round feature. And then it starts to beg the question to me that, you know, again, I don't want to take away program or anything, so kind of floor plan aside, if not only we were talking about eliminating the rotunda aspect on the ground floor, but if we actually pushed back the canyon south facade, once we were left of that last limestone column and really allowed that 3 bay 86 or 87 foot 10 block to be proud, to kind of read more consistent with, you know, the kind of break-in massing on the Arrête and kind of where the intent of the code is. Because, you know, even though we're calling that the 8710 vertical facade, I would argue because of the columns and railings and everything that's going up to the left of it, it's actually much more like a 100 foot or 110 foot facade. And is there any ability? I mean, it's all kind of pre-function space there. I guess there's one little bay that's inside of your actual kind of civic ballroom. But, you know, if it was stepped back several feet, almost to mimic how far back you are on the east edge for where the egress doors are, one, it would kind of further that move of this kind of outdoor space, and it would kind of honor Todd's earlier read of section 2.2, where we want to promote kind of outdoor spaces that have, you know, public view to mountains and things. So now it wouldn't just be this kind of half circle outdoor gathering. It would maybe have some small patio space, 5 or 6 feet deep, that overlooked the sidewalk, and it would achieve kind of further identifying this 3 bay 87 foot 10 facade as the limit of the extent of this facade.
So
are you saying like cut this out,
hey,
this part?
Stephen, hold that thought for a second. So Rory, do you have a specific recommendation that you can
my
summarize
recommendation to honor, like 75 foot is somewhat arbitrary. The 87 foot 10 feels it feels consistent with the context, but I would argue that 87 foot 10 stops here. And so I think this is right now more like a 100+ facade. And if all of that could push back, now I understand there's some columns, and I understand the nature of PT. And so is there a way to erode these columns, make them as minimal, grab your PT structure where you need them? This becomes some sort of trellised lattice structure. Maybe it pulls off of this roof, as someone had suggested earlier, or not, but can you just disintegrate it in a way that would still allow the facade to step back so that this is really reading as the building block facing canyon? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It makes sense, Matthew?
How did you achieve the setback on the
Yeah.
east without a column? Is that because it's been planned to have that jog at the southeast
Yeah,
corner?
the column bay on the east is much smaller. If I popped up that plan real quick, you'll see that this is just a different column bay. So we're cantilevering off of that column in both directions. But this is pretty well close to the edge of that column bay.
I mean, it would be epic if you could, like, I understand transfers are possible, and you can upset some beams potentially too if you don't want to dig into the parking garage, and they can become planters or whatever. But to me, this corner is it's been a part of all of this discussion for entry, for transparency from Canyon, and now it's becoming a key player, in my opinion, of kind of really allowing this facade to sing. So if there's anywhere else worth spending enough money to find a structural gymnast that can do something, it'd be amazing if you could erode this corner further.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also, I would just add, in eroding it, but also or reorganizing it, because I think what I'm synthesizing from a few different observations is that, and you can kind of see it, from the 3D views from the packet and everything. It's the most prominent corner, but it feels like the least organized facade on the whole, 4 sides of the building, probably because of its complexity. It's absorbing several programs over several stories, but if we're sticking strictly with what the purview here, talking about the facade, the monumentality of the facade, I actually think that part is well organized and speaks well for the building, and this part is a little bit left undesigned by comparison, or unresolved by comparison, I should say.
I think also continuing if we're going to just keep going west, sorry. I think I would like to also address that bridge element. I know programmatically behind where zinc is cool. I think that this is going to be, if it is followed through as to actually be zinc, which I know is expensive, it could be pretty cool. But I just wonder if the bridge element, it's again it's so different from the St. Julian, but it's kind of half tying into the architecture of this new element of the new building. I just wonder if it could just be something totally different and unique, more glazing or lighter, or just something that signifies a connection to something existing, and that it could be sort of different. I'm not sure if the zinc is working on the end connecting to the St. Julian.
Yeah,
connection needs to be like a little bit. I think that connection needs to be studied and detailed and celebrated maybe a little bit more. And I'm not sure if the stone coming up like a chimney is. I don't know. Maybe that's.
I'm curious, why is that not just all glass? I mean, I understand. I mean, they make mullion mates, and you can back paint glass if it's a storage room or something. But to me, the intent that you got about halfway on this facade is to make it a transparent link, so that it's just kind of, it becomes as light and airy and glassy as possible, and it lets the two individual facilities read as clear buildings. What's unfortunate is actually the alley facade has the full glass treatment, and I don't know enough about the building to know if you could flip the stair and put, kind of that service window punch componentry on the north side, or if that's a function of existing hallways and existing vertical circulation. But even still, I think you could probably just glaze that whole damn facade and treat some mullion mates to get some partitions to interrupt it, and look at back painted glass in some cases to kind of just make it go away, like just kind of completely transparify it.
Would you simplify the thought, if we did all glazing, if we had to have some spandrel in there to accommodate a space that doesn't want to be glazed, is that language
Are you saying, I mean, it looked like there was a storage room that doesn't have the glazing. You know, if the storage room could be relocated, or like you said, have some not spandrel, but
back painted glass
or
yeah, exactly,
glass or
frosted
something, you know,
like
Right.
if you paint surface 4 but leave the other 3 surfaces transparent and picking a color that almost kind of you wouldn't quite know that you can't see into it unless it was night or something. Is it possible to flip the stair to the north and this to preserve as much transparency from kind of the canyon visibility, as opposed to, you know, the north facade here is buried in an alley? Or is that
Yeah, Rory, if you could see Stu's face, he's probably smirking because we have looked at this bridge over and over and over again. It is a very, very challenging condition. We've looked at it so many different ways, and what we've tried to do is try to make it as transparent as possible, and arguably almost not exactly mediate, but just not celebrate itself. It's supposed to go away. And so it's not supposed to be part of St. Julian, the original St. Julian, or the annex. We did happen to use the zinc because that felt appropriate. But I think our goal is to make that facade go away. So if we go back to this facade, to your point about can we get rid of these horizontals, that's something that we're exploring. Can we continue to expand the glass over? I think that is something that we have to explore as well. And even when it comes down to the roof form, we have the standing seam metal roof that intersects the clay tile roof. That's something that we're looking at to try to simplify as well. So all of those elements, you guys are on to something that we're concerned with too and trying to refine.
And then I think the last comment that I was going to make about the metal treatment is that there seems to be it's the mechanical screening. I just wonder if the mechanical screen, you know, if we're talking about some level of design hierarchy, if the mechanical screen deserves to have this really cool zinc material, or can it be something like a lighter metal that blends in with the sky a little bit better. I think the mechanical screens that are kind of lighter in color and lighter materials can kind of end up blending in and disappearing a little bit more. But right now it's in the hierarchy, it's kind of as prominent as the cool treatment of the facade. That might be studied.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like DAB members are kind of in agreement on how to approach this and what your recommendations might be. So I feel like I need to summarize them so that we can sort of wrap this up. Do any of you want to try to summarize where we are? Because I'm not sure. So no new discussion until we summarize where we are.
I would say I can try. I'll attempt to try that. The 75-foot overall length is not particularly relevant in this circumstance. It's more about the balance between kind of the massiveness and the structural issues that you have. There seems to be a lot of agreement on this, that really this whole thing is about creating this passage through here that's really great, and you got to nail it. And it takes some, like right now it's this kind of initial over-designed, and it maybe just needs to get a lot simpler and more elegant. And
what
you know,
what are you pointing to, Stephen? Tell me what.
You used some fancy word there. Passage.
The French passage is this right here.
The passage.
So you're saying that, okay.
And maybe, you know, if all of this is all simplified, but there seems to be agreement that, you know, this, you know, there's some structural issues, and maybe what's really making this feel massive is the kind of fussiness of what's going on all in here right now.
Yeah, I think to summarize that would be the primary 87-foot length of the building block facade does not appear to be generally of concern. The southwest corner beyond that, I think, without exception, all of DAB takes some issue or another with and deserves additional study.
Okay, I'm still missing a recommendation.
Keep working. You're there. You're almost there.
The recommendation. I think it's
something that the planning board can look at and say, have they met this? Have they satisfied this recommendation?
In particular to the length component is what you're fishing for, right, Todd?
Well, you said the length. I think the recommendation regarding the length is it's not an issue.
Yeah.
We're good with that. There's some other things that need to be, that you would recommend that maybe because the length isn't really an issue, there may be some other things that could be mitigated or modified in order to
I really think it's just simplifying. I think it's
simplifying or reorganizing the southwest quadrant of the building.
Yeah.
That kind of dovetails and relates to both of the two items we were tasked with looking at today. The one about the public entry and visibility of entry. This directly affects that. This directly impacts the second criteria of the overall building length and massing and height.
Okay.
So I think the southwest, quadrant, in terms of just architectural expression, massing, transparency, is kind of the weaker corner of the building, I would say, without insulting anyone. Don't want you to take that the wrong way, but obviously, it's still an area that they're actively working on too. So it kind of shows. And
so let me ask DAB members this: if they took the structural and design features from the rest of the facade to the east, and they applied that to the west, to that western corner, would that make it?
No, the opposite. Yeah,
we're talking about shedding some of the architecture, mass bulk, and fenestration from the southwest quadrant.
From the southwest corner.
Yeah.
Okay. Like even like this overhang, right? Like if this was more Victorian, where it's just wrapping and there's no it's just, and these, these are kind of, you just got a lot of stuff going on, right?
Okay.
And it's searching for one voice, and you're, and I think you guys get it. It's just where you're
okay.
At.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes more sense. Okay, so let's stop there because we're now into the 6:20 to 6:30 range, and see if there are any other design issues that you all want to raise about materiality, or not to put any ideas in your heads, but is there anything else that we should talk about that are relevant to this discussion?
I just think it's worth a study. The tendency in this whole part of Boulder is to have so many materials going on. I almost like to see what, if maybe do a SketchUp real quick, turn the flagstone off here. See, that might actually, I don't know. There's the Arret's perfect example. We got glass. There's 8 different materials going on. And it's simple.
Yeah, the layer cake, the tendency for the layer cake buildings that came out of this whole development, I'm not sure has stood the test of time.
Yeah.
I think the last thing that I would like to add is that if you're looking at the north elevation, if you are going to have a lot of people coming in from from the north coming from Walnut side, that corner treatment. I mean, I like the way that there's the angle, that again, it's like the nod to the curve. You have the angled wall that's directing you into this pathway and the arches, and I just want to be sure that the facade that's on the ground floor of the alley is not so back of house looking.
It's interesting. That's actually the visual terminus to the connection up to Pearl Street. You come down on the side of Bar Taco there, and you straight shot through that precedent arch that they were sharing, and you straight down the Med. You're just staring at this blank kind of receiving wall. Is there some way to make this like a visual terminus that's actually exciting and encourages people to use this? Because these little cuts through the city grid, these are gems, especially for bikers and pedestrians, like to not have to skirt the entire block. And to make these as inviting as possible is, we get very few opportunities in the city to create these types of pedestrian links. So beautiful.
And I think you have to be really careful too, because 10th Street has the necessary evil of, back of house for the St. Julian. I was just down there on Saturday, and it looks like there is a dumpster area for the St. Julian, but all the dumpsters were out on 10th Street, and delivery trucks and all the, 10th Street is not a great experience. So to make, like Roy said, the terminus of this pedestrian experience something that guides you into this, into the civic center promenade, or whatever Stephen called it.
Passage.
Passage. I think that's it's just important to keep an eye on that north elevation as well.
And just to tack on to the Passage thing, what they do in France in this circumstances, they actually would glaze most of this corridor, and the reason for that is that it activates that whole space. And think about that a little bit, because we don't want this to be a place where homeless people want to gather and hang out there. And actually, if there's more glazing over in this area, you'll have more eyes on this, and people won't feel as comfortable just kind of milling around there.
Well, and it's almost set up for it. You have this pre-function lobby that almost extends to the north facade that could be like this beautiful look into the ballroom. But then we just have some sort of stair or red block of program that interrupts it there. So I don't know if there's an opportunity to kind of link that visually and actually make this more exciting.
And steal the space. I mean, bring the party out here, right?
Let me
right into
let me jump in here if I can, because I'm concerned that we need to tie these things to the specific criteria. And I think we're starting to jump around a little bit.
I think
it's criteria too with human scale. I mean, I think it's making sure that pedestrian experience is, is comfortable and guiding people through that space, because that is, like I said, people are going to be approaching this building from the north primarily.
Okay. We just really need at this point to tie these things to specific criteria that we can reference in the recommendations.
I think it's the same criteria as the south facade, as far as the north facade needs pedestrian kind of treatment to garner pedestrian scale and visual interest.
Okay, so
Taiwani's raising her finger like she's going to educate us here.
In an effort to summarize the minutes and how that's going to get sorted, if this is an addition on top of what staff has asked for key issues, as we go through, we're going to need to have the criteria that's addressed that you want to see. If it's the human scale elements, 2.1, we need that, and then a summary that we can really summarize for planning board. If there's one for the alley elevation, I know because these are starting to blend together, materiality, alley elevation, and human scale detailing. I'd like to separate those out, get them summarized, so that when the minutes are taken, it's really easy to grab those out of the conversation.
I mean, I think it ties directly into the second of our two key issues, the building site and public realm interface. It just wasn't listed by staff as we were only tasked to look at Canyon. I think the addition would be same criteria, but north facade.
Yeah, north and the pedestrian easement, because this is this area here is for sure a public way. And the more is, I mean, think about like where 1010 Brasserie is, right? You have those great windows and you can see people eating along there and stuff. And right now you got the bathrooms, which is going to make this a great place to do things that aren't great right now. Where you get the eyes, it's the old Jane Jacobs stuff. We get eyes on that. This is a street you've created. And so, you want people hanging out here before they're doing an event and, and that will activate.
So Stephen, without getting in overly detailed about this, what kinds of recommendations are you looking at in general?
I would say make sure that along this passage that the program in the building supports a pedestrian and public-private interface, which I don't think the bathroom's doing.
Okay.
Yes, agree.
And that's straight from the criteria C, subsection 1, avoid large featureless facade surfaces.
So if you can summarize all the recommendations you have for that particular one together in a group, because right now there's been a little bit of summarization and a little bit here and there. So as this conversation for this particular one winds down, Todd, that's what we're going to need, is a kind of summarization that encapsulates the different discussion points.
Right.
Matt, were you guys offered the opportunity to redesign the entry into the parking garage? I had always assumed when this civic site got developed that they would also address what to me looks like a temporary gabled open air roof into the parking garage. Is that not, there's no scope that extends up there?
It wasn't something that the city nor St. Julian asked us to do, nor KJID. Technically it's part of the city, but none of those groups have asked us to do so.
Okay. That's unfortunate. It feels like this is the opportunity to kind of replace that with a more permanent looking structure that actually adds to the pedestrian experience along Walnut there.
Yeah, I mean, from Pearl to Canyon, it could be just really great.
Yeah, like overhead structures. It's built into the entry to the garage. There's lights. It's like, it feels nice.
Yeah, it's a super cool place to stroll. To stroll along there.
So I think I'd like to keep you guys from brainstorming here, if that's possible.
No more additions.
It would be fun for the applicant to invite us all over for a brainstorming session informally. Well, we couldn't do that though. We couldn't do that as a group, but it would certainly be fun. So I feel like we're 30 minutes over when we thought we were going to wrap up. And I'd like to wrap this up now if we can. So I don't know that there's any more that we need to talk about. I think it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to summarize. But can we wrap up the discussion of the items that we've been discussing? And then I do actually want to go back and ask either the staff or DAB whether the two questions that I brought up are relevant.
Are you getting at that on those two questions? Why did you bring them up? Is it, you think the building's too high because of the appurtenances on the roof, as referenced one of the neighbors' concerns, or is it
I'm trying to be responsive to the neighbors' concern, because I think that as an advisory board, if we're going to have public involvement, which we are required to do, there we have to be somewhat responsive to it to the extent we can. So what I tried to do before we actually met was go through all the criteria and see if any of the criteria tied in with any of the comments that we received from the neighbors. And it seems to me that those two that I mentioned do. One is views and the other is the mass and scale of the building, which includes whether the building is too close to the lot lines, whether it's pushed too far up towards canyon, whether the structure on top is intrusive, whether there are ways to preserve their views through architectural design features. But the question really is, are those two things relevant? First of all, are they relevant? Second, if they're relevant, then is there anything we can do as a design advisory board to address those things?
I think that there was one suggestion that I had of changing the material of the pertinence, the mechanical screening, to lighten that up so that it doesn't appear to be part of the building and adding to the height of it. I think that addresses a concern that that we had in public comment, and I think that the situation with the blocking views, it's unfortunate, and I think that is something that I feel like it falls on the shoulders of the developers of the ARET. I mean, I think that I don't necessarily think that it's the St. Julian's responsibility to fix the issue that was created, I think, in the development of the ARET.
Yeah, and maybe planning board.
I think planning staff would say that maybe more politically correct, and
well, if it's okay, let's ask them.
Todd, I have one response to the two criteria you brought up.
Yeah.
One of them in particular, and I could be corrected on the verbiage, but it's intended to protect view corridors from public ways. And I think just technically it doesn't apply in this situation, although it's unfortunate. I'm very sensitive to the other property owners' concerns about the development. If this development is by rights, I don't think that criteria applies here, because we were discussing in the public comment alluded to concerns about views from private residences, within a development. And so I think that one criteria you brought up, if you're asking us if we should include them in some responsive way, I don't know that one technically applies, because that is really intended to be, from more public oriented spaces, not from each private domain. Right. I could be misinterpreting that, and if anyone wants to,
I mean, I would
correct me or offer a different opinion. I think it's technically, it would be a stretch to apply that criteria to private residential concerns from a private space.
I mean, I think that we're talking about urban density here too. I mean, this is a downtown urban area where you are allowed to build right up to your lot line and not have any setbacks. I think that the space that's been given up already is generous. And I also think that like having more visitors come into this part of downtown is going to help all those restaurants. And I think it's a great I think it's a great use and a great addition for that area. I think I'm happy with adding that.
Can I ask the staff why those two criteria were not flagged?
So the public view shed one is generally intended from areas that everybody can enjoy. So whether it's coming through that walkway that you can then see the Flatirons from the peripheral areas or the open areas on site. Yes, it's very difficult to protect every private view shed. In general, some of our newer plans, we like to identify where those public view sheds are, which ones we want to really protect, because it helps to clear that that confusion up. But I'd say in this instance, this particular area in the DT4 and through Canyon, larger, this environment was really anticipated for larger buildings, this mass and scale. In general, as you look across this building here and some of the other heights of the adjacent buildings, they're very similar. There's some adjustments to setbacks here and there, but footprint, overall height, and some of the other details are pretty in keeping with that block. Where we see in downtown, where there's more adjustment and more of a finer grain look at residential versus adjacent to commercial uses, is in that interface zone, in blocks that are primarily residential outside of the kind of the urban core. Those tend to have more of the step backs and floor adjustments and that type of thing. But that, I would say that, Todd, that's staff's approach to looking at it is, public view sheds in the kind of area around those. I'd say this particular property is still maintaining that from that walkway and the kind of primary views to the park and to the Flatirons. And then on the other, on your other guideline that you were wondering about, there's a variety of step backs here on this building. And I think it's a two-part thing. One, they're trying to work with existing structure on an existing building that provides another level of constraint that most of the new construction is not experiencing, but that they're working with different setbacks in those balconies. And then with the added recommendations from the board about this western edge and how they can start to improve that I think addresses some of that proportioning and other things that we were concerned about.
Well, okay. I mean, I don't agree, but I understand where it's coming from.
But I can confirm, though, we did look up, staff's able to confirm that in the adjacent residential building, it's a double loaded corridor. There's not a central unit that has only western facing. So there's not a particular unit that's totally cut off.
Right.
Either facing units, south facing units. And so hopefully, with the adjustments that are made here, if the board feels like they want to look at some additional modulation to the massing and some recommendations on that, you're absolutely welcome to do that. I think on the north side, that's a totally different condition, right? Alley facing units, you might have.
Well, I did take the time this afternoon to Zillow some of these addresses.
Yeah.
Just to see what the view is like from inside. And I think the building could be designed in a way that better preserves those views. But if you go on Zillow and you Zillow some of the addresses and invite yourself into these places, you can see that that there are opportunities to do that. And that seems to me one of the things that architects are so skilled at doing. So,
but I wholeheartedly do not believe that it is this development's responsibility to preserve the value of those units.
It makes it an arms race.
When this building was built, there was always a potential that there would be a 4-story structure blocking those balconies.
Yeah, I mean, I would take it one step further. If we made that recommendation, we would be, in a sense, it'd be takings. It'd be a takings issue where we're like saying as policy that the rules we have in place don't apply, and we should, have some other standard.
Well, and it would suggest that it's an arms race of development, that whoever builds first,
right,
and most quickly, all of a sudden you have to now respect everything they've done. That's why zoning exists. And they knew full well when they designed that building what context they were in. If anything, these people should be stoked that they got to enjoy those views for as long as they have, because it's been caught up in this, approvals and kind of economic development. I get it. I mean, it's a natural response to be emotional about the loss of an incredible asset like that. But to look at DAB to find something in the code, or even just, kind of express a personal opinion about how to preserve those views, I don't think this is the appropriate board nor venue for it.
I mean, I loved the deck on the West End Tavern. It's like my favorite place to go. There's a building totally blocking the Flatiron view. It's just, we got to enjoy that view for a while.
I'm glad you brought that up, because they did make concessions.
Right.
They did make design concessions. So I think one of the things I'm sort of getting at is that I think that we represent the community. We meaning the board.
But how is the builder of the St. Julian not part of our community? How are they different than?
Well, they are, but the applicant has their architects that they've hired who represent them. We don't represent them. We represent the broader community.
I mean, I would somewhat disagree and say that we represent the design guidelines.
Right.
And any authority we have to advise anyone should be done first in the interest of understanding our guidelines, understanding the constraints that the broader community is bound to under the zoning rules. So I think our commitment would be first to representing and interpreting what those rules are before advocating for one property developer over another, which is what we'd be doing, really. To be asking one developer to not do something that they absolutely can do by rights.
Well, but we're an advisory board, so we're doing this within the context of the guidelines, but we're perfectly within our purview to use the guidelines to make suggestions.
Well, I mean,
I think our suggestions are how to integrate this into the fabric of this downtown area. That
right.
We're looking at it on a macro level, not a micro level of someone's balcony. That we need to figure out how this integrates with the guidelines and with the fabric of what's happening in the downtown area.
Yeah, and the corners, I mean, there's like where the building steps back in the southeast corner preserves the window on that second level that, again, did not need to be done at that location. The structure happens to work in that location. Those corner views are still preserved. I would argue it's more of a privacy consideration. And if we wanted to open a whole can, which I really want to avoid, it would be about evaluating which windows have cross views from the hotel suites into these private homes. And, I noticed, Matt, when you were orbiting the model, that there's some little corner windows there. And again, I hate to open a can here. I realize that's a nice treatment for a facade. Architecturally, the corner light's going to feel fantastic, but these are maybe smaller concessions in an effort to, demonstrate a commitment to addressing the context and the concerns of the neighbors that, how much benefit is that temporary guest getting out of that side window versus a full-time resident who now doesn't have nightly guests peering into their, what I assume is living room on that corner.
Right. I mean, from an urban design perspective, these two buildings should be joined.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's the right way to do it, is to join the two buildings. And the building, the arete should have been built to have that happen in the future.
Which two buildings?
The arete and the new tower could technically share the same wall.
Yeah, they should be sharing a wall. And
Kalani, you had your hand up, and Jennifer had her hand up.
I was just going to say, in general, for the board, we know that we've had other projects where there's a difference of opinion between either staff and the board, or individual members of the board. I think one of the best ways for us to record this when we get to the summarization point is we've always done where most of the board feels one way, that's part of the recommendation, but we've noted that there might be a difference of opinion within that summary too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, fair enough.
Important to just, when we do the summary, think of that too, Todd, as far as we want to be able to acknowledge the voices in the room as part of that.
Yeah, and I think everyone is very sensitive. I mean, the fact that it is a sensitive topic, it really, this issue is going to go way over the head of DAB and fall right in the lap of planning. And I don't envy the planning board or the property developers or the homeowners this situation, because it is truly unfortunate. And I think we're all very, very sensitive of it, which is why it brings up emotion. I would just advocate, I don't know that we'd find consensus on the board to create a judgment or recommendation on an issue that clearly is going to have the community very activated on very many different levels, and the discussion has only begun. I don't think we could provide a valuable statement from a design perspective beyond what we were tasked to do tonight on the actionable items we can advise on.
I mean, the only thing is, from a zoning perspective, legally, they're allowed to, they are zoned to be able to build their building right up to the east property line. So, I mean, architecturally and design-wise and by code, that is allowed. So, as professionals, those are within the rules. It's the conversation that needs to happen later with planning board, like you said, that I don't necessarily envy. But I think from the perspective of design professionals, we can only look at it from the code and zoning.
Right. And I would go so far as to commend this project for what they've actually tried to do, because they didn't need to.
Agreed.
Okay. Jennifer, you had your hand up. I don't want to ignore you.
Oh, no, it's fine. It might not be as relevant now, but I did just want to remind the board that this building truly has been a partnership with the city, with the planning board, with CAGID, City of Boulder. This has been in countless task force and many, many meetings over the last 15 years. And there's been a lot of thought and a lot of dedication and a lot put into this structure. So it's not just St. Julian trying to build an addition on their hotel. It truly is meant to be a collaborative effort. And it's coming from a long line of history and of negotiation. So moving forward, with comments and moving into planning and what may or may not be allowed, I just wanted to remind the board that it truly is a collaborative effort between CAGID, between the city, and between St. Julian partners. And it's meant to be something that can be shared by all and not necessarily one developer's new addition. So just wanted to remind the board that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's coming across as a very collaborative effort. So
and I think I appreciate you saying that. I think my concern is that we've been through at least at one situation where I think there was a higher expectation about DAB's response to design criteria, and we sort of fell short of that expectation because the way I look at this is that as a mediator is that there's whether questions and there's how questions. And if somebody asks you to review a building and they're thinking this is a whether question and you're thinking it's a how question, then your responses may not meet their expectations because they want to know, should we do this or not? And we're trying to tell them how to do it. And so they're asking a different question. So I just want to make sure that because there's public interest in this particular project, which is seldom what we ever get, but we did get it on this other project in the same way. And I think that people felt that DAB wasn't being critical enough. And so I think because we're getting pushback from the neighbors that we need to be as critical as we can and as hard on the applicant as we can, because that's our job. And so I'm comfortable with what we've come up with. I don't agree with it, but I'm comfortable with it with where we are. I'm sure the planning board will understand the nuances that we've been talking about here, and the questions that have been raised. So I guess I'm comfortable moving on. So but I hope we're finished talking about it, because I think we need to wrap it up. So I would like to try to summarize where we are and then see if there's anything that we need to add to it. So under the first issue, which is the building siting and public realm interface, the concern there was initially the distance from the two entryways, and that's not a problem. I think the bigger concern and the recommendation that kind of came from Brendan was, don't hide the entryway on the west side, and then began to look at how that entrance at the entryway on the west side can be softened. Well, there's also a part about softening the straight flat wall under the windows, which is that whole length that probably could be softened in some way, either through landscaping or breaking up the sort of horizontal brick structure there. But most of the conversation, I think, was around the entryway, and whether there's an outdoor use that could be tied to the arch. Can there be more transparency onto the entrance, getting out onto Canyon, even though that's not a drop-off place for cars, and we have to be sort of conscious of that. I think that's the main summarization of that, and that's under H3A of the site review criteria. So that was the first issue we talked about. The second issue we talked about was the facade itself, and whether the 75-foot, whether exceeding the 75-foot facade length was okay. And the consensus, I think, there is that it's fine. There was some concern about the balconies are too massive, and those columns on the more eastern side of the facade could be softened more, could be tied in more with the design structure on the St. Julian. That the southwest corner was problematic, and that it's appears unfinished. It's a little bit too maybe busy, is how I might describe it. And it needs to be simplified. And in the process of simplifying it, let's see, simplify or reorganize the southwest corner, and how that ties in with the first issue we were talking about. Maybe there's possibility of too many materials being used, that it may appear to be too much of a layer cake, which I always love Rory's analogies. And so I think that's where we left it with issue number 2, which is 2.2C in the design guidelines.
I think maybe, Todd, one way to very simply umbrella summarize that is that we're fine with the massing and the length of the primary element on the south facade, as long as the southwest is studied further.
Yeah.
As long as what? You broke up there a little bit.
As long as the southwest is studied further.
Southwest is studied further. Okay. Got it. Okay. And then the other issue that we talked about, sort of jumping around a little bit, had more to do with the human scale and the pedestrian experience, which would apply to this facade, but also applies to the rest of the building, including making sure the passage programs support the sort of public-private interface, changing the screening to reduce the visual impact. There was some discussion about glazing, and those were some of the other recommendations.
So Todd, I think that the last piece goes with the first key issue that you just mentioned. It's just like a part B of the first key issue. It has more to do with the public realm interface.
Public realm interface. Okay, which is
the first.
With the first issue we discussed, so that would fall under the site review criteria, H3A.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's continuing the discussion from Canyon to the west face.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's pretty good.
Okay.
And we can tune the meeting minutes when we see them to make sure we get the verbiage straight.
I'm surprised that I didn't, but I think we covered everything that we set out to cover. Matthew raised a question early on about talking about the alleyway. And we didn't really talk about that.
Well, Todd, we did. That was this add-on issue.
Okay. All right.
When I was referring earlier, we got to it, and that was my concern with approaching the site from the alley.
Okay, great.
So I feel satisfied that actually got covered quite thoroughly.
Okay. Before we wrap up and let the applicants leave and enjoy their evening, ML, would you like to add anything to this discussion as our planning board liaison?
That's a loaded question, ML.
Just say no.
No, I think I'm going to say yes. I would. I totally appreciate the conversation, and I especially appreciate, and I hope I'm looking here on the screen to see, I hope that the applicant takes deeply to heart the passage, the whole idea of this is an important link back to Pearl Street Mall and to the Civic Center. The thing I think that has not been addressed is this. I was there when there was nothing built on this site, right? And the city decided they want a civic use there. The original Chamber of Commerce used to be on that site. It was like in a little no place house, completely. You could drive by it, walk by it, and you wouldn't know there was anything there. the fact that the city wanted this site to have a civic presence, I think is really important, and obviously why it hasn't been developed in all these years is trying to figure out how to get a civic partnership onto this site. I think design-wise, one of the things I would point out is that this is basically a 4-story building, but the base is a civic building. And so you wouldn't know that looking at the building, which is trying to blend into its neighbors, the hotel and the residents. I think it would behoove the applicant to consider the role of the civic use that has driven the site since day one. First of all, to be set aside and to be held as a pad. And what does that become? And I think it ties right into this whole conversation of this paseo going all the way from the Pearl Street Mall to the Civic Center. We've got this amazing opportunity to create public presence on this site. And I think it was always intended to have that public presence by having a civic use. And I don't think that reads as an architectural move at this point in time. So I would just bring that up as as perhaps a way to think about, yes, the building feels a little bit confused and unresolved. And I think it's because it's trying to hold this identity of what is this base versus what is this hotel? And you've got to go back to what is the concept? What is the gesture of this building? I think the base is public, civic, and that doesn't read. So that would be the thread I would like to see brought forward. And I love the way your conversation went. I think that you dealt with a lot of complex issues, and especially dealing with the zero lot line information, the alley, what's with all those trash cans and all that stuff. We're going to walk right past it on the bus. I mean, these are real issues, and I totally appreciate that DAB has taken the time to explore them in a meaningful way. And thank you, Todd, and Kalani, for trying to get it as clear as possible when it comes to planning board. It would be nice to reflect the intelligence that has gone into the conversation tonight. Thank you very much.
Mel, the fact that the city is a partner to this development, I mean, has planning board talked about the extension of, kind of contingent upon further development of the pedestrian corridors that access this civic structure? Is there a way to wrap that into the scope of the project?
This project hasn't come before the planning board since I've been on it. I'm in my second year on planning board. In the years, I don't know when it last came. I know the city council has had those, 4 or 5 study sessions around it, to flesh out a lot of that conversation. But I think, Rory, what you're talking about has to do with city planning and how do we connect one thing that isn't on our little piece of property that we're looking at to the bigger picture. I think that is a planning question in the broadest sense. And I have not broached that subject with the planning staff or with the city manager or with anybody, but I do think it's important. All these discrete parcels that we look at are part of a bigger fabric. And it's so cool. It's just so cool when we can identify, here's a potential, to do right by connecting some dots.
Yeah, I was stoked the day I found that little sneak between Walnut and Pearl Street, whatever, 10 years ago. I was like, ooh, look at this. This is a nice little cut.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for your good work tonight.
Okay, thanks, ML. So I think we'll wrap that up then and let the applicant go. So thank you, Matt and Stuart and Kristen and Shannon and Carol and Bruce. I guess I don't see him in the group. So, but thank you everybody who contributed to this and for putting in this extra time. We're now past 7, so we really appreciate your willingness to stick it out. And any public attendees who are still listening in. Looks like there may be a few. So thank you all too. We have more to the agenda, but we'll let you guys sign off.
All right. Thank you so much. And thanks for your time. Also your thoughtfulness and even kind of making it a little bit fun, not terribly formal, and really appreciate all of that. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, board. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hey guys, I apologize. I have to go. This is my 7's about my max for these meetings. So
I have to go too.
Okay, well, I think
me too.
board matters, calendar check, and adjourn. So let me just ask Kalani if there are any board matters that we all need to hear.
No, just a calendar check. We don't have a project for January, so there will be a meeting. So just because the holidays are coming up, and I don't know, Todd, if when your last meeting is, or
yeah, I don't know that either.
Oh, as soon as I find out more information, I'll report about that.
All right.
All right. Have a happy holiday.
Okay.
If you have any questions.
Same to you, everyone. We'll just adjourn.
That was fun.
Great.
Okay.
Great conversation.
Bye.
Bye.